Hi, my name is Jack Wallen, and I'm here today to tell you about a book I wrote called Frankenstein Theory. There's a very touching story about this book that I'll tell you about in a moment. But first, I want to tell you why I decided to take on Mary Shelley's rather famous and incredibly amazing book. So I don't remember what the year was. It was the year around when I wrote Frankenstein Theory. I had been reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because it was a Halloween season, and I always read one or two, three books of horror leading up to October 31st. And that year I decided I was going to read some classic horror novels. Now, I had already read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein years ago, so this was really a reread. So I start reading the book, and maybe 10 or 15% of the way into the book, I remembered how different the book was to what most people assume is the story about Frankenstein. When you think about Frankenstein, I'm guessing that the imagery that pops into mind is from the movie, or the story that pops into mind is from the movie. Now, I'll say this. I think the movie is brilliant. And I can only imagine what it was like to go to the cinema and see that movie when it was first released. How utterly and profoundly frightening it must have been. And it was very well made. And I'm also a big fan of The Bride of Frankenstein. I think that those are two of the most wonderful gothic horror films ever made. But at the same time, they are such a the Frankenstein film is such a departure from the source material. And the further I got into reading or rereading Frankenstein, I realized that how different the public's opinion or take on what the story is. And I immediately thought, I want to write a Frankenstein novel to serve as kind of a bridge between Mary Shelley's original and the movie. And the reason why I wanted to do that is because I believe, as much as brilliant as I think the Frankenstein novel is, I think it's not quite as accessible to modern audiences as it might have been when it was originally written. And it wasn't just the language. The language isn't the problem. Honestly, it is the fact that between the novel and now, we had that black and white film that even the people that never read Frankenstein, they just assume that that film is the story that Mary Shelley wrote, and it's really not. And I think in the back of my head, what I wanted to do was write the story that everybody assumed was close to what Mary Shelley had written. So the idea was to write my take on Frankenstein set in the same period as Mary Shelley's version, but put my own spin on it. And my spin, in very typical fashion, is that you don't know who the monster is. And that sometimes you have to hold the mirror up to yourself to see who the true monster is. And at the same time, I wanted to infuse my love for classical music into this novel. That's why the tagline for the story is, "If music be the food of life," which is a play on Shakespeare's "If music be the food of love" from As You Like It. I think it was As You Like It. Yeah. So I wrote the novel thinking it was going to be a one-off. And what I fairly immediately realized in the writing of that book is that I was able to that I love that time period first and foremost, and that my writing style lends itself to that period fairly well. So I didn't have any trouble with the period. And it was absolutely a joy to write. But here's the part where it starts to kind of tug on the heartstrings. So, when I was writing Frankenstein Theory, my father became very ill. And I got the call one morning, I think, that he had been hospitalized and it wasn't looking good. So I threw some things in a bag, I jumped in my car, and I drove off to my hometown where I was born and raised. And I went immediately to the hospital. And of course, as soon as I saw him in his bed, I broke down, and it was hard. It was very hard to see him like that. Because for the most of my life, that man was invincible. And that first night that I was there, I was sleeping on a cot in his room and trying to sleep to a backdrop of his labored breathing. And it was breaking my heart. And I had to do so. I had taken my laptop with me, and I had to do something to distract myself from the downward spiral of thoughts that I was going through, because I knew it was very obvious that my dad was going to pass away. So I opened up my laptop, I opened up the Frankenstein Theory file, and I started writing. Ironically, I was at the moment in the story where Victor Frankenstein brings the monster to life. And I really struggled writing that section, because in the same room was my father laying on his deathbed. So I struggled through it as much as I could. And eventually I told myself, I can't do this right now. What I thought was going to be a distraction wound up simply reminding me of the impending death that was coming. And so the next day I knew he was going to die. And his last words to me were, "Everything's going to be okay." That was very typical of my father. That on his deathbed, he wanted to comfort me. He was a very special person. And so I couldn't continue writing that book. I had to take a beat. And he passed away, and he had asked me long before he died to speak at his funeral. Because I had, when my brother had passed away many, many years ago, I was at the funeral and I was sitting in the audience, I guess it's, and the minister that was brought in to speak was speaking in very broad terms. He did not know my brother, knew nothing about my brother, knew very little about my family, and he was just kind of going on and on about the kind of boilerplate things that ministers say. And I stood up and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. I can't let you keep speaking." And I walked up to the podium and I said, "Please let me finish this." And I spoke about my brother. And that's kind of what led my father to want me to speak at his funeral. So I did. And it was hard, as one would expect. But at the same time, it was assuring that I was able to tell the people in attendance, and there were a lot of people there, what he meant to me. Because I knew what he meant to me, he meant to a lot of people that weren't in the family. So after the funeral, I went back home and opened up my laptop and opened up the file and realized that I could continue finally. And I wrote the rest of Frankenstein Theory with my father in mind, wishing like hell that I could bring him back to life like Dr. Frankenstein did. But anyway, so I'm very proud of this novel because it was the first time I ever was able to prove to myself that I could write something not in this period. I could write something in a period that was very different from ours, and yet we have all of this source material to look at, to compare it to movies and books and music. And what was fascinating to me was taking, I'll tell you this because it's not giving away too much of the story, but essentially what I did was instead of Dr. Frankenstein piecing this beast together from different parts of dead humans, he used the body of a beloved musician of the time. And when the musician was revived, he didn't lose his abilities. That's all I'm going to tell you about the story. But there's a love interest, there's betrayal, and there's some horror. It's got everything. You'll laugh, you'll cry. It's better than Cats. So, at one point, a few years ago, I started doing a video series called Moments from My Worlds. And I would take monologues from my books, and if I couldn't find a monologue that I liked, I would write scenes based on chapters or interactions in my books, and I would film them. I would film me acting them out. And one of those that I'm most proud of is the one I did for Frankenstein Theory. It's Victor talking to Henry. Now, I'm going to play a little sample of it right here, one of these little corners. I don't know which one it'll be in. And then at the end of this, I'm going to tack the whole video on so you can see it's about 4 minutes long. Now, I can't find the original file. I don't know where it went, so I had to download it from YouTube, so the quality is probably not nearly as good as it should be. But understand that these were early on in my video effort attempts, so it's not quite as good as it could be. But at the same time, I'm still proud of what I created. I'm actually really proud of that whole series I created, and I would like to do that again, but it takes a whole lot of effort. The one I did for Suicide Station was just insane. But anyway, back to Frankenstein Theory. Um, I think what I wrote is what Mary Shelley would have written had she lived now. And I'm very proud of that book for so many reasons. Number one, because anytime I think about it, it reminds me of my father telling me that everything's going to be okay. And there are a lot of periods, moments in my life where I need to remind myself of that. And it's also, you know, as I said, it was the book that proved to me that I could write in period style and get away with it. So I did think that that was going to be a one-off. It turned into a series. I have done one for Dracula, and I did one for Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My plan is that the next book is for my take on Phantom of the Opera. I don't know when I'm going to get to that because, you know, I have all of these other things I have to do for my publisher. And this book series was written before I got picked up by the publisher. So I can't just throw one of these books at the publisher and say, hey, publish this one. So this one's, I've got to do it on my own. So, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I hope this is probably did not pique your, I don't know if this piqued your interest in reading the novel or not. But if you liked the Frankenstein movie, I highly recommend that you read Frankenstein Theory and then read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein if you've not already. Because I think you will agree with me that my novel serves as a fairly good bridge between the novel and the movie with my own twist on the story. Anyway, thank you as always for giving me a moment of your time. You can find all of my books on Amazon.com. Just go to Amazon.com and then instead of just searching for my name, click that little drop down and select books and then type my name because then all of my stuff will come up. Because, you know, Amazon search is just not the best. Anyway, thank you again for giving me a moment of your time. I know it's precious, and it means the world to me that you're willing to spend a few minutes with me during your day. I hope you and everyone you love and respect have a wonderful, wonderful day. Waldman is failing me. I am to leave my post and never return to this school again. The headmaster insists I have absolutely no competency as a surgeon. His biggest concern is that I am bringing down the good name of this university. I am done, Henry. It was foolish of me to believe that I could follow in the footsteps of my father. I cannot live within the boundaries of the common. I think and feel far grander than that which can be found in the pages of books and the teachings of the rusting masters. Don't you see? We surgeons should rise above the cautionary tales and the techniques handed down to us by those who would call themselves scholars and doctors. We are more than that. We are gods. Our hands wield the power to give and take life. Shouldn't we then think beyond the mending of wounds and slowing down the tick and tock of Father Time? Henry, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. This university, its rules and ethics slows down the evolution of the surgeon's art. I want more. And I plan on getting it. Leave with me, Henry. Shrug off the shackles of control these simpletons have over you, and discover with me a far deeper truth to life and death. Together, there is no limit to what we can accomplish. Imagine the possibility unfettered by the rules of common man. You and I could become the standard by which all future surgeons are compared. New treatments, new techniques. We could even discover the means to bring back the dead. Leave with me, Henry. We are the future of medicine. You and I could mock man and God with a single righteous breath.